This tutorial is for 5th grade, Module 4, Lesson 13. In this lesson, we're going to use diagrams to help us multiply fractions. This first diagram is showing us half of 1/4 pan of brownies. We have a related multiplication sentence and the diagram that goes with it. Before we begin, I just want to remind you of multiplication of whole numbers. We often used arrays to learn the multiplication facts, and that meant it was a series of rows and columns. The first factor in our multiplication problem always referred to the number of rows. The second factor referred to the number of columns. That's going to be the same for multiplying fractions. For example, if we go back to the beginning of this problem, it's asking for half of 1/4 pan of brownies. So we're going to look at this picture. The entire picture would be one full pan of brownies. But the problem says we are only starting with 1/4. So the first step is to color in 1/4 of the pan. So there's our 1/4, and it's the column in our diagram. To find 1/2 of that, I would then shade in half of that fourth piece, and that's my row. This section, half of the fourth, is the answer to my problem. But to figure out what that section is, we'd have to look to see how this piece relates to the entire pan of brownies. So if we look, we have 8 pieces all together, and one piece that's completely shaded. So half of 1/4 pan of brownies is 1/8 pan of brownies. This piece is 1/8 of the entire shape. Let's look at some more examples. This question's asking for half of 1/3 pan of brownies. That means I'm going to start with 1/3 pan. The 1 whole is showing me the whole pan of brownies. So I'm going to divide that into thirds and shade 1/3. So there's my 1/3. Now I have to find half of the 1/3, which means I'm going to draw a horizontal line dividing the thirds in half. And this shows my 1/2. To find the answer, I have to show where the 1/2 overlaps with the 1/3, because this piece is 1/2 of the 1/3 piece. Now we have to figure out, as a fraction, what part of the whole is this piece. Well, there are 6 pieces all together in the pan and 1 piece shaded. So that piece is 1/6 of the entire pan. The related multiplication problem is 1/2 times 1/3 equals 1/6. Question C is asking for 1/4 of a third pan of brownies. Again, the whole is 1 whole pan. We're going to start with 1/3 of the pan. So we'll draw our thirds, shade in 1/3. So the column is showing me 1/3 of the pan. That's what I have at the start. I'm going to take 1/4 of the third, which means I need to draw fourths horizontally across the diagram. And this piece is showing 1/4. So this piece in the corner, this is 1/4 of the entire third. To figure out that fraction, we have to count how many pieces are in the entire diagram. Well, there are 12 pieces altogether. One piece is shaded. So 1/4 of 1/3 pan of brownies is 1/12. And again, the related multiplication problem, 1/4 times 1/3 equals 1/12. These diagrams help explain why when we start with two fractions and we multiply them, we actually end up with a fraction that's smaller than either of the two fractions we had at the start. This next question says to draw models of 3 times 1/4 and 1/3 times 1/4. And we're doing this to show how it's different when we multiply a number by 3 as compared to multiplying it by 1/3. So we'll start by showing 3 times 1/4 in the first diagram. So I'm going to show 3 times 1/4. Well, if I separate my whole into fourths, and colored in 1/4, that would be the same as 1 times 1/4. If I colored in 2/4, that would equal 2 times 1/4, because it's two groups of 1/4. I need 3 groups of 1/4. So this diagram represents 3 times 1/4 for a total of 3/4. Well, that's different than 1/3 times 1/4. We still start with our fourths. I shade in 1/4, and I need 1/3 of that piece. So this is my 1/4. I need a third of this piece, which means I need to divide it into thirds. This piece is 1/3 of the 1/4. I look to see how this piece relates to the whole, and I can see that it is one piece out of the 12 that make up the entire whole. So there's definitely a difference between 3 times 1/4. You can see how much of the whole is shaded compared to 1/3 times 1/4, which is a very small piece compared to the same whole.